what we do, telling stories about anything, that's the base currency of being human. Exchanging stories is how we grow and live and learn and connect and build. So those stories need to be based on something that matters. And our values are the ultimate base level connective tissue for humans all over the world. Our values unite us. They honor our humanity.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella-Williamson. This season, our focus is on communication trailblazers. Today, I'm joined by David Allison. David Allison is a global values leader, human behavior expert, and founder of the Valuegraphics Project. After decades in marketing, David recognized that demographics weren't working. Gender roles are blurring, age has nothing to do with how we behave, and our income doesn't change what's in our hearts. It's our values that drive our behavior. He launched the Valuegraphics Project to create the first accurate inventory of core human values for everyone on Earth. After 750,000 surveys in 152 languages, we now have a complete directory of human decision-making, and innovative organizations like PayPal, Lululemon, and the United Nations Foundation are connecting with people in new and more profound ways by honoring what they value. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me over. Nice place you have here.
I'm really excited for us to chat. I have written about value graphics and your concepts, both in my national PRSA column, as well as in my upcoming book that comes out October 25th. So we're going to dive right in. But tell us more about how you got there. Tell us about your background and then what you're up to today.
Where I come from is the marketing and advertising world. So I had my own ad agency for a long, long time, and we specialized in a pretty cool sector. I still do a lot of work in this sector. I find it fascinating, but we were helping large scale real estate developers figure out the brand and how to sell everything from condos to resort homes so the whole condo tower. The guy building that would come to us and say, "Hey, David, what should we call this thing? Let's build a website. Let's brand it, position it, figure out how to get everybody to buy one of these condos." We did this really well for like 10 years all over the world in all kinds of different cities. And what happened every single time that led me to the Valuegraphics Project is exactly the same pattern. You start every project just like you do in PR. You sit around and say, okay, who's our people? What's the target audience description here? Who are we trying to impact, engage, motivate? And largely, you use demographics to describe these folks. So at the time I was doing all this work in the real estate sector, I called them all Bob and Sally, because it was always aging baby boomers selling their single family home in the suburbs and moving to a stacked urban environment in downtown Gotham City, where they were going to live out their retirement years and spend some of the extra money from selling the home to buy a place somewhere warm to go for the winter. So we did this over and over and over again, and every single time the demographics were the same. A little bit of psychographic differences from one to another, but primarily it was Bob and Sally over and over. That's how everyone was trying to sell to. Mm. The cool thing about the real estate industry is if you do your job really well, like 6 months to a year after selling all 300 condos in a tower somewhere, you get to meet them all because you're all in a room with a glass of cheap champagne and a shrimp on a stick, and you're like celebrating the new building they're all going to live in. And I kept looking around these rooms, and about 10 or 15% of the people in the room were Bob and Sally. So who were all those other people? Why were they here? Who are you guys? I didn't advertise. I didn't write messages for you. I didn't buy stuff in your channels. I didn't do anything to get you here. And yet here you are.
Wow.
And then we would just go and do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And so when I finally sold that company, I thought, we should think about that because that's pretty darn inefficient. We're wasting 85% of our time and money talking to people who don't show up. And then these strangers come. Thank you all for coming and helping me look like a successful marketing guy. But we didn't even talk to them. So let's figure out what's going on here. Fast forward to today, and I'll give you a couple quick stats to maybe just set the stage for what we can talk about. So now, as you've mentioned, we've done 750,000 surveys around the world in 152 languages. It boggles my mind when I think back to all that data that we've crunched. And we can measure how similar groups of people are with incredible accuracy, more accuracy than you need for a PhD from Harvard. So if we look at any demographic label, gender, income, marital status, number of kids, education, all the stuff. We all know all the labels that we use when we're defining a demographic target audience. And say, how often are the people inside each of those buckets? How similar are they? How targetable are they? Well, they all vary a little bit from one bucket to the next, but on average, they're 10.5% similar, 10.5% aligned on what they believe life is all about and how they make decisions about everything in their lives.
Wow.
So now go back to the room with the shrimp on the stick and the champagne. I'm looking around and going, who are all these people? They don't look like the people I thought I wanted to get here. They're not Bob and Sally. They look different because I was looking at them with the demographic lens. What I should have been doing is saying, you know what? They're all identical. They're all here because of a set of values that drove them here. And that's what we can measure now. We can look at those rooms and say, they may all look different on the outside, but on the inside, what makes them human? These folks are all exactly the same. So if we know that in advance instead of afterwards, then we're golden.
That's powerful. I mean, about what year was that? Because I think it's still progressive for you to have this idea, for you to be driven this way.
I sometimes wake up in the morning and wish I just invented the proverbial better mousetrap, because then everybody knows what a mousetrap is and they just come buy mine because it's a little bit better. We've invented a thing here that's taking a long time to get it to seep into the DNA of the way companies work, because we've been using demographic profiling for millennia. It's baked into our very genes as humans. There's a whole field of study called heuristics that's about taking looks at people and going, oh my God, those people are going to hurt me. Oh my God, those are my friends. And doing snap judgments based on external characteristics like gender, marital status, number of kids, wealth, all those kinds of things. We survived as a species because of our ability to make demographic stereotypes work for us. And now we live in a time when we don't need to do that anymore. And in fact, it doesn't make any sense anymore.
Societal change, which I think is part of what this pushes, is it takes time and an openness. And with all the diversity, equity, inclusion work I've done and cultural strategy work and that's why I really admire this work, is as much as I try to educate others as well, that we really shouldn't take some of these microaggressions as aggressive as we take them, because a lot of times, I mean, in some environments, we have the privilege. All of us have some environment or place where we're privileged, and others, we're the other, right? And we're othered. And what you're asking people to do is look at what unites us versus makes us different. And that you're asking us not to use our cave people brains, David.
It's so revolutionary in a weird way, but
and not too. That's what's so frustrating.
So
I'm sure.
not, right? I mean, I love that you said that these things unite us. That's one of my core principles of why we do what we do, is our values unite us all around the world. So after all this study, all this research, all that number crunching, there's only 56 core human values. So 56 things that drive everybody to do everything that they will ever do or ever have done. Every emotion, behavior, and decision comes from some combination of those 56 things in your system, like a fingerprint. We call it a value print. So based on what values are most important to you, it's how you live your life. It's your operating system. So we have these 56 ways we're different from each other. But to put that into context for a moment, there's 88 keys on a piano. It's harder to learn how to play Happy Birthday on the piano than it is to figure out how we're all the same and what drives all of us to do the things we do all over the world. It's pretty remarkable that we're that similar. billions of people. And we're all connected by 56 threads that are in our hearts that drive everything that we do all day long, whether we know it's happening or not. It's a beautiful thing to have found that the operating system for being human is that simple. Now, there are differences in different parts of the world. In your late childhood, early adolescence, you go through a thing called socialization. And depending on who's influencing you at that moment in time, parents, church, friends, whatever, you get your values. And in China, people have a different set of values than they do in Africa, than they do in Boston or Berlin or Brussels or Barcelona. But those values aren't that different. It's only 56 things that can combine and recombine. And in fact, we see massive similarity around which ones tend to be at the top of the list. A little bit of variation here and there, the odd kind of outlier value that's kind of kooky that we don't see anywhere else in the world that's near the top.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're, one big happy family.
Well, I'm going to jump in and tell you what struck me when I was, it must have been the book where I got this nugget, but that the top value globally, and correct me if I'm wrong, was togetherness.
Close. Yeah.
What is the top one?
Well, togetherness is a cluster of 5 values.
Right.
Top value around the world is family.
Not togetherness?
There's 5 values that are all togetherness values.
Yeah.
And those 5 togetherness values, if you look at them as a kind of a cluster of values, they are at the top everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's belonging that's at the top, sometimes it's community. So one of those 5 values is always, always, always somewhere near the very, very top all over the world. And if we look at everybody on the planet, our number one most important value to the human race is family. Number 4 is belonging. But that's an interesting story. Let's talk about the United States. In the United States, and then I'm from Canada, so we're friends, we're next door neighbors. In the United States, number one most important value for the entire population is belonging, followed by family. In Canada, it's family, followed by belonging. Now, I look at, from my seat up here in the backyard of the United States, watching what's going on with my friendly neighbors to the south, and I see that value of belonging driving all kinds of things that are going on right now. Aunt Sally and Uncle Bob are not invited to Thanksgiving dinner this year because they chose the wrong tribe to be part of. Belonging is more important than family. I would never hear that story in Canada. You'd never hear that we disowned a member of our family because of their political affiliations, of the tribe that they chose to belong to. So it shows up in the data. Now, here's the good news about what's going on in the United States right now. A little while ago, we profiled, just for fun, CNN viewers versus Fox viewers. So I thought that would be really interesting to see, an interesting way to kind of take the pulse of what's going on. And to be frank, you'll get this, you're a PR professional. I thought I was going to get this great story about how different they were and that I would get Anderson Cooper to say the word Valuegraphics out loud on CNN one night. And report on those horrible people over there watching Fox and what they're all about. So I thought I was going to get some controversial data. And in fact, the opposite happened. The people watching CNN and Fox are very, very, very similar. Americans are very similar to each other, regardless of what's going on right now. And it gives me great hope because I know that regardless of the divisions that seem to be present today, you're going to get through this because you're way more similar to each other than you think.
Yeah, and I would say that from my perspective, I agree. And to build on that is, and I just read an opinion piece that was a national piece, and it was like, your extremes are loud, but they don't cover the whole group, right? And no group is monolithic, and that's what you're saying, no matter what someone's age is or ethnic background or gender or however they identify as a human being, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to fit all these boxes of criteria that we made a long time ago, right?
No.
And generally, people want certain things, and like security and safety and belonging and being in relationship with others. And I think it's interesting, the US's data points around family versus belonging and where it is in the ranking. I think part of it is that the American family system isn't as encouraged and supported and as healthy as maybe it used to be, or at least as together, we'll say, as it used to be. So I think people are, in a good way too, waking up to the fact that if your family isn't necessarily the right unit for you or healthy for you, it is important to find that belonging with others who maybe offer you those healthy experiences.
Sure.
So it's interesting how that is. And yeah, the data points are really interesting. And of course, there's some values that are very American, like there was one around independence that uniquely was a little more off the charts for the US, right?
Yeah.
Residents than maybe other areas. Part of that is what I write about in terms of cultural differences, is that, the collectivist culture thinks like a group, and a lot of collectivist culture, people who identify with those kind of behaviors and values come from backgrounds that are like from the Black community or African American community, Latino, Hispanic community, Asian community, where our family it's very ingrained as we're growing up in children to think about the family first. But then professionally, that can kind of hinder us from trying new things, doing new things, traveling and being somewhere else for school or a job. And so there's things we have to balance as professionals. So it's really interesting how those values, that some of them are raised into us for a matter of time. And then as adult individuals, we have to really decide, what really do I align with now? What serves me now or better?
To a degree. So your values don't change. Once you get them in your late childhood and early adolescence, they're yours for life. I jokingly say sometimes, like, we're not an octopus. You don't get to chop off a value and grow a new one later. They're locked. Now, here's a great example of how that works. So going into the pandemic, we all had to isolate. Kind of new thing for most of us.
Right.
And if family was an incredibly important value to you, which it is for a large number of people, they were the ones who were doubling down and Zooming with their mom every day and making sure the aunts and the sisters and the cousins, everybody was okay. And like, who needs food and how can I, like, just family on steroids was how they responded to this stressful situation because of their value that they place on family. But if you didn't have a great deal of importance in your personal makeup around family going into the pandemic, you didn't suddenly start freaking out about your family just because you were in a pandemic situation. You maybe had the value of ambition was a really big value for you. So you were calling and making sure your boss knew that you were still working really, really long hours. And you weren't one of those ones who was like just pretending to call in on a Zoom call. You were killing it because you still wanted that promotion that you were talking about back when you were still working in the same space. Now, after the pandemic, you probably calmed down everybody, regardless of their values, and stopped freaking out and trying to compensate for the values that weren't being met in an isolation environment, and found ways for those values to either go back to being met the way they used to before or other kinds of solutions. So our reaction to the world around us can change. And it's one of the reasons I have such problems sometimes with these like brand studies I see, like brand emotion studies. Nike's the most popular brand in the United States. True. That day, the next day, you can change your opinion about whether you like Nike or not, whether you had a bad experience, your shoelace broke, you called customer service and they were mean to you, you went back in the store and you hated the colors for the new season. Your emotions will change, your behaviors will change, your decisions, everything will change except your values. They won't change.
Well, okay. I'm going to give you, maybe they don't change, but because I experienced this in my lived experience, I want to say that maybe our values don't change. Some of them are really pushed on us and maybe we find that they're not important, but I feel like if they don't change, or we have the opportunity for them to kind of maybe move up and down our hierarchy of how much we value them or how important they are to us in certain parts of our lives.
Yep. You're going to find out that I'm really big with analogies because I'm not all that smart and it helps me remember how this stuff all goes.
Yeah.
But I always tell the story about passports in the sock drawer. So we all know someone who has 2 or 3 passports, 2 or 3 nationalities. And at the moment, let's say they're working and living in the United States. And so their American passport is the one that they're using on a regular basis. But let's say their British passport and their Chilean passport are in the sock drawer. They don't lose them. They're just hanging out there in the sock drawer. Then they meet someone and they decide they're going to move to London and start a new life there with the new love of their life. Now the British passport's the one that they're using every day, and the American passport's in the sock drawer. You don't stop having those values. The rank order and how they're influencing you, it's not like one's going to fall from number 1 to number 56 on your list, but number 1 to number 4 becomes number 1. That can happen. And it also sometimes feels like they're changing because of the behaviors and decisions that they're actually manifesting in our lives. And we think about that as like, well, go back to my story about the pandemic. Somebody's like catching themselves in this conversation you and I are having in the middle of their behavior around, I got to Zoom with my mom every day. They're like, yeah, family wasn't important to me before I got in here, and now it is. It can feel like that, but family was important to you, or you would not be Zooming with your mom in the middle of the pandemic. I guarantee it.
Yeah, I think that's really important to add. And what I would say, just to give myself some wiggle room with my listeners emotionally, is that, I think if you have any kind of traumatic experiences that change how you see things or your relationships with certain types of people, that can also drop them in the hierarchy. I'm sure it's still important to you, but like, for example, if your parent is just someone who's not healthy to engage with, then while you saw everyone going crazy and zooming, right? If you realize, well, I better do that too, because I think we've all had that moment where like, I need to make them a priority. And then you do, and you're like, ouch, that hurt. Okay, maybe not as much, right? Or your definition of family changes, where you say family to me today, when I was younger and didn't have kids, I think the family I was born into. Now I'm like, oh yeah, number 1. And I think of my husband and the kids. So it skews things. And I want to underline that just because I know I have a lot of listeners that come from the Hispanic Latino backgrounds, and they're going to be like, so they're going to get either uncomfortable that I don't feel like this is important enough. So I want to give a lot of grace and openness to that understanding.
but think about what you just said for a moment. Your definition of family has changed over the course of time. Absolutely. But you would not be married with kids if you didn't place an importance on family. So you've manifested this value in your system in a different way than it was when you were small, but you would have chosen a different path if family was like way down the bottom of the list. And we see this all the time. You know who tends to, now we're going to get in trouble. You know who tends to be the kind of polar opposite of the family-driven folks many times, not all the time, nothing's an absolute. We're not binary about anything here.
That's right.
Is people who work crazy long hours because they love their jobs. Family falls down the list. They're married to their job, happily married to their jobs.
I can identify with that a little bit. And I think a lot of people who do PR, it's very purposeful and it's a struggle. You do feel like, gosh, there's not enough of me to give or go around.
Some people prioritize work and some people prioritize family. So the people who are prioritizing work, here's where it gets interesting. They could be prioritizing work, which is not a value. Work is not a value, but that behavior could end up taking front seat in the way that they engage with their family, because it's their way of providing and making sure their family is okay. They're not good at showing love and playing baseball and going to Little League, but they can go and work like a crazy person so that their family is okay and has everything they need. So the value there might be family, even though the expression of it looks like workaholism or something.
So we talked about different values. Do you have an example or a story of how these values kind of intersect and work in PR or marketing?
Well, here's a good one. We all know Patagonia as a brand, and we all know North Face as a brand, and we know that they're both in the same space, and they're both selling, let's call it outdoor technical gear. And we all know that people aren't always using it to climb mountains, that a lot of it is just about getting to and from work or through your commute or whatever it is you're doing. So to make a point about how values attract people, we did a little study and compared the people who prefer Patagonia to the people who prefer North Face. So if you're in PR and you're trying to get some stories written that are going to magnetically attract people to one brand or the other, if you can make those stories about the things that attract people to those brands, the values that are working as the attraction mechanism, you're going to have the best stories in terms of their long-term impact. So here's one data point from each side of that equation. Patagonia, one of the values that we see really, really high for people who like Patagonia is personal responsibility. They want to feel like they are moving the needle and getting stuff done. They are never going to be the ones sitting on the couch going, somebody should, they're going to get up off the couch and go and do that thing that they think needs to be done in the world. On the North Face side, what comes up really high, and we don't see very often in this kind of a category, is creativity. Now, anecdotally, I live up here in Vancouver, which some people refer to as Hollywood North, because of so many films get shot up here. It's a rare day where you're walking down the street where there isn't a film crew in full swing shooting something. And I look at all those film crews, they're all wearing North Face.
Huh.
That's the brand of choice from my anecdotal observation. So if I'm the vice president of marketing of North Face, I'm not going to go and chase that same value that the personal responsibility are all over for Patagonia. I got to find a way to make creativity part of what our brand is all about. A simple way to kind of paint the picture, but once you know the values of the people you're trying to engage, you just give it to them. It gets pretty easy.
Absolutely. And it crosses all kinds of barriers or perceived barriers that we have as people. I mean, I think of that and, at the minimum, North Face could be like, well, we should at least try to tag people who like creative things when we do advertising on Facebook and Instagram, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely right. It makes you think about it all the way around in terms of how you're going to communicate to your target customers, right? Or avatars, however you want to call that, but your ideal connection. And I think in terms of public relations, like it's such an opportunity. I am excited. In my book, I have a model. Well, I have two models because I couldn't even stop, where I intersect, using a Venn diagram, how public relations naturally can intersect with DEI work. And it isn't that scary and polarizing. Actually, it's very bridge building if you see how there's commonalities, common shared values between both of those professions. And then another one where I also intersect and bring in social responsibility. So it's not just things we should do. It's like, if you're supposed to go there as an organization and a corporation, like, here's how you go there with these two practices and principles. And I think part of it is really just thinking about what values people have, because that is their why. And that's what motivates them. And it crosses the boundaries.
Yeah.
That's what I'm certainly trying to do with these concepts that I think seem intimidating to other professionals. I'm like, think about what connects us versus what we're different about, right? And that is progressive and that is different. So your clients, I'm sure, benefited from the surveys you've done for them and the values, but was there any momentous stories that you can think of?
Let's talk about the Environmental Defense Fund out of Washington, D.C. We went and did a segmentation study for them, which is what we sell, is highly accurate descriptions of the various kinds of people, segments of people within a target audience. And they were interested in their donors for obvious reasons. That's the fuel that makes a not-for-profit go forward. So here's the thing. There's other segmentation models out there and companies who do segmentations. They tend to have a set number of okay, we got 100 different kinds of people. And for you, it's these three. And for you, it's these three. So we don't do that. We let the data tell us what's going on. And we've yet to come across the same profile more than once. So we always have to make up kooky names for them. So one of the segments we found, we call them the guilty as charged. And here's why. These folks are donating to the Environmental Defense Fund because they feel guilty about the behaviors and decisions they're making as a result of the value they place on experiences. They're flying all over the world to go climb Kathmandu and go hiking in the Peru and do all these cool things. And they know that every time they get on one of those planes, that they're not doing happy things for the planet. So they make a donation to the Environmental Defense Fund. Now, when I said this in the boardroom, somebody was like, oh, that explains it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, well, in our database, there's these people that kind of fit into that. Now I know why, but they give us different amounts of money at different times of year in a really irregular, hard to pin down pattern. Everyone else, it's like we get a gift at Easter or we get a gift at Christmas or whatever. These folks are kind of all over the map and different amounts of money. And clearly what they're doing is they're given based on just how guilty they feel about the particular trip that they just took. So did you fly around the world in a business class private jet? That was a big donation. You just took a little commuter hop 20 minutes away? Small donation. So they saw that pattern happening in their data, and we were able to tell them why it was happening. Now, what they did with that shouldn't tell you because that's their own proprietary strategic response to the situation. But let's just say one of the values we know is true for people who tend to be environmentally concerned is the value of personal responsibility. So these folks like to feel like they're the ones who get stuff done, that they're in control, that they're moving the dials and the needles on the dashboard. So if we gave them the ability to harness that guilt and turn it into a thing where they feel like they are making things happen, they're going to be far more inclined to carry on with the behaviors that we'd like them to carry on with. Let's say that.
I saw what you did last summer.
Oh, and you know what? That was what was fascinating.
Yeah.
So it was the first thing we had to do in that boardroom. God bless everybody who works at the Environmental Defense Fund. They are there because that's where they need to be and they love what they do. The first conversation we had to have was revealed the segment. These people know they're doing something wrong and they're giving you money because they feel guilty. Their response was, well, they should stop. Yeah, but they're not gonna. Well, they should, why would they carry on doing something that they know is terrible? Because that's their values and they're going to keep doing that. There were people in the room who just did not want to talk to them. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to be doing any marketing for that group at all because they are evil and they should stop that behavior. Okay. Or we do some marketing and get more of their money so that we can go out and do good things in the world. And gradually the room turned in that direction.
I understand that experience. More and more over time, we're getting closer and closer to our values, I think, with an expression through the profession. And so we say we do public relations for social good, and we're finding our way. And so we work with a ton of nonprofits, or close to 100 at this point. And it's the same thing. You're going to have those who can't get over, well, this is right, so this is what should happen. And a big part of what I do is like, here's the reality. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying this is real. And here's how we message or work with the scenario.
I've been married to the most wonderful man in the world for the last 25 years. And when we first started getting to know each other, this was a point of contention in our life, was that he saw the way things should be in the world and got angry when they weren't. And I saw the way things were in the world and said, okay, how can we work around this and find a way to make this go to a good place, realizing we're not going to change everybody.
Right.
So yeah, it's two very different perspectives on things for sure. In fact, our values unite us. And right now the world needs as much uniting as we can possibly find.
I align with that. That's my heart and why I focus on PR as the first or the principal frame of how I think about any communication challenge, is that it's people focused if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, isn't it remarkable? You think about it, we have all this data in these boardrooms where we're making decisions. We spend gazillions of dollars collecting data about geo-targeting, and when somebody walks by a store, we can shoot them a coupon and we know if they clicked on the shopping cart 3 times before they got off our website, all this stuff. But we don't have any data about what makes us human. We sit in our boardrooms with demographics, psychographics, brand preference studies, brand emotion indexes, all these reams of data. Now we have the ability to also bring some data to the table about humanity and what we actually care about. And it's been absent from the conversation until now.
Just thinking about that is really profound. And I think what you're doing is important because these companies have that megaphone and they have, frankly, the money and the power to support good change. So kudos to you for giving them insights that can make us more like humans and people that they understand better too.
Yeah.
So how would communicators approach using values-driven data if maybe, for example, the organization isn't at a place where they could hire the Valuegraphics Project to help them with that? Yeah. Is it within your books, or how can we really take this home?
There's 3 ways that you can do this. The first one, as you mentioned, is you can hire us, and we're surprisingly less expensive than you might think. So if you're even curious, somebody should just reach out and we'll let you know. The second way is you can buy the book. Current book is called We Are All the Same Age Now. and you can find it on Amazon. And in there is a 10-question quiz that you can use to send out to your customers, your prospects, and ask them those 10 questions. Is the scoring keys in there. And then the responses that you get will point you to one of 10 chapters in the book where we spill our guts about one of those archetypes. Here's everything we know about people who fit into that category. So I like to say it's like playing the piano with your fists. It's not super accurate. It's just 10 questions and 10 big archetypes, but at least you're playing the valuegraphic piano and not the broken demographic cello over in a corner with missing strings. So cool. That's the next way. But for free, you can use these 3 questions. We call them the 3 telltale questions. And if you just ask as many people as you can, these 3 questions, you can make them sound more like your own voice. You can teach your frontline sales folks to just bring it up in casual conversation when you're on the phone with a prospect. Collect as many responses as you can, and then you're going to start to see patterns emerge. It's kind of like dumping the Halloween candy on the table out of the pillowcase, and then you look at what you're getting and you're like, oh, we got a lot of chocolate this year, not so many pieces of fruit. So you start to be able to see the patterns, right? So 3 questions. First one, why do you go to work? Seems like a pretty straightforward question, but if you ask people like, why do you go to work? The next one is, why would you give away half your lottery winnings? That one you might have to probe a second layer, because people go, oh, well, Cancer Society because my mother. And it's like, no, not where. Why would you give away half of your lottery winnings to anything? I don't care where you're giving it to, but why would you do that? And the third one is my favorite one. You get to send a note to yourself from 10 years ago, to your 10 years ago self. What would you say to your 10 years ago self? And more importantly, why would you say those things? What's the piece of advice you'd like to give to yourself from 10 years ago? The advice is interesting, but why would you give them that piece of advice? So ask as many people as you can those questions. You'll see patterns emerge, signals in the noise, and you'll be able to watch those bubble to the surface. And that's people telling you why they do these things that are large scale decisions that they're making. That's, again, the least accurate of the 3 tools I've talked about today, but it's a great way to just start playing with this. Just talk to your friends about those questions around your next dinner table, party, conversation, cocktail bar, whatever you're at. Just bring it up in a way that doesn't make it sound creepy and weird that you're grilling them, and just start to see how people answer. You'll see values come to the surface. It's a fascinating thing to do.
2 things come to mind. Number one, I'm like, that's so fun, because as adults, we get told not to ask why anymore. That's a big, important question. And I like that all of your questions started with that, because I don't think people think about that why very much.
I make fun of Simon Sinek, but I mean, I do owe him a debt of gratitude. He opened everyone's eyes to the importance of what's the value that's driving your behaviors right now. He called it why. Why are you doing that thing? It's basically saying, what are the values behind your behaviors, decisions, emotions, the way you set your life up? All we've done is taken this behavioral science truth that values drive everything in our lives, and we put data on it. We didn't invent this. This has been going on for decades. It's how humans have behaved since the dawn of time. Behavioral scientists around the world have been studying this for a long, long time. Simon Sinek's running around going, why? And that's getting people to start to get down to that level of what's driving you. We just added data. It's like the next evolution of it.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And just want to acknowledge you as a trailblazer. And my whole season is about communication trailblazers who not only pioneered something new, but have left a smoother path for those behind to understand our world and how to better communicate in it. Is there anything you would want young professionals, whether they're marketing side of the house or PR side of the house, advertising, like those who come after you, what should they know?
What we do, telling stories about anything, that's the base currency of being human. Exchanging stories is how we grow and live and learn and connect and build. So what you're doing is really important. So you need to think about the responsibility that comes with that level of importance you have in terms of how you're impacting the culture that's growing up around you. Those stories need to be based on something that matters. And our values are the ultimate base level connective tissue for humans all over the world. Our values unite us. They honor our humanity. So make your stories about what matters. Find a way to bring it back to values. Bring it back to that beacon that can help unite the world around the stuff that makes us all the same.
Well, we're sending that on up to Hollywood. So, and because that's really important. I love it. That's great. So I ask all my guests this question because I love this concept. What does smart talk mean to you?
Well, what we should be striving for. We all love talking these days. There's a phrase out there about the democratization of media. Since social media has come along, we all have a megaphone. And so as a result, there's so much talk going on and a whole lot of it isn't smart.
Yeah.
A whole lot of it's stupid. And it's stupid things being said in stupid ways about stupid stuff to people who are stupid enough to believe it. And so we need a filter. And if we can maybe keep that as a little mantra and say, you know what, I'm going to focus on the smart talk. I want to be part of the smart talk. I want smart talk to be the way that I engage with all of the noise that I encounter in the course of my day.
Yep. All right. Well, you champion smart talk. I'm going to champion Valuegraphics.
Deal.
We'll take care of the world.
Deal.
All right, David. I'm sure everyone's really excited to learn more about you and Valuegraphics Project and your upcoming book. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you or the Valuegraphics Project?
Well, valuegraphics.com. And Valuegraphics is spelled just like it sounds, just like demographics, VALUE graphics. Keep the E in there. Some people like to leave it out. Valuegraphics.com. And if you want to connect on social, home base for me is LinkedIn.
Well, thank you, David. Sharing all your knowledge with us today is really incredible.
Thanks for having me. It's been so much fun. Great talk.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us for today's episode. We love unpacking communication topics to elevate our industry practice. Keep an eye out for the release of Smart Talk, the book, this fall by following the podcast and our MVW Communication social media channels. And if you enter your email at mvw360.com/book, you'll get updates on the release of my book. You'll be the first to know every milestone we make. And as always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.